How could a fractured coalition of just 20,000 European knights and infantry dare to face 25,000 battle-hardened Mongol warriors who had already slaughtered their way across half the known world? On April 9th, 1241, near the quiet Silesian town of Legnica, a Polish duke made a decision that would echo through the centuries. His forces were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and facing an enemy that had never lost a major European battle. The Mongols had carved through Russia like a hot knife through butter, leaving behind pyramids of skulls and rivers choked with corpses. They had perfected the art of total war over decades of conquest. And now they were at Europe's doorstep. But Duke Henry II the Pious had something the Mongols didn't expect. He had studied their methods, learned from the catastrophic defeats of his eastern neighbors, and prepared a desperate gambit that would buy Western Europe precious time. What happened on that blood-soaked field would determine whether Christendom survived or fell like so many other civilizations before it. The Mongols believed they were invincible. They were about to discover that even the greatest empire could bleed. To understand the sheer terror that gripped Europe in 1241, you need to grasp what the Mongol war machine had already accomplished. Just 3 years earlier, in 1238, they had descended upon the Russian principalities like a winter storm made of flesh and steel. The city of Vladimir, home to 50,000 souls, fell in just 5 days. The Mongols didn't simply conquer it. They systematically burned every building, executed the entire royal family inside a church, and enslaved or killed virtually every inhabitant. When they finished with Ryazan 2 months earlier, contemporary chronicles reported that no eye remained to weep for the dead. These weren't exaggerations. The Mongol strategy relied on absolute terror to break enemy morale before battles even began. In Kiev, once the crown jewel of Eastern Europe with a population of 100,000, the Mongols left perhaps 2,000 survivors after their 1240 siege. The psychological impact was calculated and devastating. The Mongols would spare a handful of refugees specifically to spread stories of the horrors they'd witnessed, ensuring that the next city in their path would be paralyzed with fear. Their military advantages seemed insurmountable. Every Mongol warrior was essentially a mobile weapons platform, carrying 2 or 3 composite bows, multiple quivers holding 60 arrows each, a curved saber, a lance, and often a lasso for dragging enemies from their horses. They could fire accurately at full gallop, sustain arrow volleys for hours, and execute complex maneuvers with horn signals that European armies could barely comprehend. Their horses, though smaller than European destriers, could survive on forage that would starve Western mounts and could cover 60 to 100 miles per day when needed. Meanwhile, Poland in 1241 was not a unified kingdom, but a patchwork of duchies constantly squabbling over power and territory. Duke Henry II controlled Silesia, but his cousins ruled other regions with minimal cooperation. The Polish military relied heavily on heavily armored knights who were individually formidable, but doctrinally rigid, accustomed to charging enemy lines in tight formations. They had little experience with the fluid, deceptive tactics that had made the Mongols masters of the Eurasian steppe. To make matters worse, Henry's potential allies were scattered across Central Europe, many refusing to believe the Mongol threat was real until it was too late. The inciting incident came in February 1241, when Mongol scouts crossed the frozen Vistula River in southern Poland. This wasn't a raid. It was reconnaissance for a full-scale invasion commanded by Baidar and Orda Khan, grandsons of the legendary Genghis Khan himself. They led the northern wing of a massive 2-pronged assault, with another Mongol army simultaneously invading Hungary under Batu Khan. The strategy was textbook Mongol: divide enemy forces, prevent unified resistance, and conquer piecemeal. On February 13th, the Mongol vanguard struck the town of Sandomierz without warning. The garrison, numbering perhaps 2,000 men, was slaughtered to the last defender. The Mongols burned the town and left it as a message. Duke Henry received the news within days, and here's where the crisis crystallized. He could wait for reinforcements from Bohemia under King Wenceslas, who was marching north with 50,000 men, or he could act immediately to prevent the Mongols from penetrating deeper into Silesia. On March 18th, the Mongols destroyed another Polish force at Chmielnik, killing Duke Bolesław and demonstrating their signature feigned retreat tactic. The Polish knights charged what appeared to be a fleeing Mongol detachment, only to be surrounded by hidden reserves and annihilated. Casualty estimates put Polish losses at over 2,000 knights and infantry. Henry realized he was facing an enemy that fought unlike anything European military traditions had prepared them for. The Mongols didn't stand and fight. They dispersed, regrouped, feigned weakness, and struck from unexpected angles. Traditional cavalry charges were death traps against such opponents. But Duke Henry II wasn't a fool, and this is where the preparation phase becomes crucial. He spent the weeks between March and early April doing something revolutionary for a medieval European commander. He studied his enemy. Refugees from Russia and Hungary had brought detailed accounts of Mongol tactics. Henry learned about the feigned retreat, the tactic where Mongol units would appear to flee in disarray, luring overconfident knights into ambushes. He learned about their composite bows, which could pierce chainmail at 200 yards, far outranging European crossbows. He learned about their use of smoke and noise to confuse enemies, and their preference for dividing enemy armies before destroying them separately. Henry sent riders to every allied duchy and kingdom within reach, calling for a united Christian force. The Knights Templar and Knights Hospitaller, those battle-hardened veterans of the Crusades, sent contingents totaling about 500 warriors, men who had fought Turkish horse archers and understood mobile warfare better than feudal knights. Duke Henry also recruited Teutonic knights from Prussia, fierce German warrior monks who brought another 1,000 men. From Moravia came several thousand infantry, and local Polish nobility rallied their retinues. By early April, Henry had assembled approximately 20,000 to 25,000 men near Legnica, a remarkable achievement given the fractured state of Polish politics. But time was his enemy. King Wenceslas of Bohemia was still days away with his massive army, and the Mongols knew it. They had their own intelligence network, and they understood that if the Bohemian reinforcements arrived, they would face a united Christian army, potentially numbering 70,000 men. The Mongols needed to force battle immediately, and Henry knew they would come. He positioned his forces near Legnica, using the Katsawa River to protect one flank and placing his camp near enough to the town to use it as a fallback position. Henry's innovation was in formation. Instead of massing his knights in a single overwhelming charge as was traditional, he organized his army into 4 distinct divisions that could support each other and avoid being encircled. It was a lesson learned from the Chmielnik disaster, where Polish forces had been baited into charging as a single mass and then destroyed piecemeal. The rising action began in earnest on April 7th, when Mongol scouts began probing Henry's positions. Small skirmishes erupted along the picket lines, with Mongol light cavalry harassing supply trains and testing the discipline of Henry's troops. In one engagement near the village of Liegnitz, a Templar patrol numbering about 60 knights encountered a Mongol scouting party. The Templars, experienced in fighting mounted archers from their time in the Holy Land, refused to be baited into a pursuit and instead held their ground, using shields to deflect arrow volleys. The Mongols withdrew after inflicting minimal casualties. It was a minor victory, but it demonstrated that disciplined troops could resist Mongol harassment. The next day, A larger skirmish occurred when 500 Polish cavalry attempted to raid a Mongol camp. They inflicted some casualties but were forced to retreat when Mongol reinforcements arrived in overwhelming numbers. The lesson was clear. The Mongols controlled the tempo of engagement. They could mass rapidly, strike hard, and melt away before a counterattack could be organized. By April 8th, the Mongol main force had arrived. Scouts reported their numbers between 20,000 and 30,000, with some estimates going as high as 40,000 when counting support personnel. Modern historians generally settle on about 25,000 actual combat troops under the direct command of Baidar, Orda, and a third commander named Kaidu. They positioned themselves about 3 miles east of Henry's camp, and the psychological warfare began immediately. Mongol warriors would ride to within shouting distance of Christian lines, displaying the severed heads of captured Polish soldiers on their lances. They lit massive fires that sent columns of black smoke into the sky, creating an atmosphere of impending apocalypse. Duke Henry knew that waiting for Wenceslas was no longer possible. The Bohemian king was still at least 2 days away, perhaps 3. If Henry retreated toward Bohemia, the Mongols would harry his army every mile, turning an orderly withdrawal into a massacre. If he remained in place, they might simply bypass him and ravage Silesia unopposed. The only option was to fight and pray that his preparations would be enough. The morning of April 9th, 1241, dawned cold and misty, the kind of weather that reduced visibility and made cavalry operations treacherous. Duke Henry arrayed his forces in 4 major divisions. The first, numbering about 5,000 men, consisted of Polish knights from various duchies and Bavarian miners who had been recruited and armed as infantry. The second division, roughly 4,000 strong, included more Polish cavalry and infantry levies from Silesia. The third division was the smallest but most elite, approximately 2,000 men comprising Knights Templar, Knights Hospitaller, Teutonic Knights, and Henry's own household guard. The fourth division, another 5,000 to 6,000 men, formed the reserve and included crossbowmen and pike infantry from Moravia. The remaining troops, perhaps 3,000 to 4,000, were positioned to guard the flanks and the camp. The Mongol army arrayed opposite them seemed less organized at first glance, a swirling mass of horsemen that appeared chaotic. But this was deliberate deception. Mongol armies were divided into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, called tumens. Each tumen operated with near-perfect coordination, responding to horn signals and flag movements. Baidar commanded the center with approximately 10,000 men, while Orda took the left wing with another 8,000, and Kaidu held the right with roughly 7,000. The Mongol strategy was predictable in outline, but devastatingly effective in execution. They would feign weakness, draw the Christian knights into pursuit, then encircle and destroy them with converging cavalry. The battle opened around mid-morning when Henry ordered his first division forward. Led by Duke Bolesław of Opola, these 5,000 knights and infantry advanced in good order across the muddy field toward the Mongol center. The Mongols responded with their standard opening move, a massive arrow barrage. Thousands of arrows darkened the sky, falling like steel rain on the advancing Christians. Men fell by the dozens, but the heavily armored knights pressed forward, shields raised, enduring losses to close the distance. Then, just as the Polish charge gained momentum, the Mongol center began to retreat. It looked like a rout. The disciplined Mongol lines seemed to break apart, horsemen wheeling their mounts and galloping away in apparent panic. This was the moment of supreme danger, and Duke Bolesław had been warned, but the temptation was overwhelming. His knights had taken casualties from arrows and needed to close for melee combat where their heavier armor and weapons would dominate. He ordered the charge to continue, and 5,000 Polish and German warriors thundered forward in pursuit. They chased the fleeing Mongols for nearly a mile, and then the trap snapped shut. Orda's left wing, which had been concealed behind a low rise, swept in from the north. Kaidu's right wing emerged from wooded terrain to the south. Within minutes, Bolesław's entire division was surrounded. The Mongols didn't close for hand-to-hand combat. They circled at a distance of 50 to 100 yards, loosing arrow after arrow into the packed mass of Christian troops. Horses screamed and fell. Knights tried to form defensive circles, but the relentless arrow storm was inescapable. Within an hour, Duke Bolesław and most of his 5,000 men were dead or dying. A few hundred managed to fight their way back toward the main Christian line. But the 1st Division had been effectively annihilated. Duke Henry, watching from his position with the 3rd Division, faced a catastrophic decision. He had just lost a quarter of his army, and the Mongols now held complete battlefield initiative. But retreating would expose his remaining troops to pursuit and slaughter. He decided on a desperate counter-move. He ordered his 2nd Division, 4,000 men under the command of Moravian and Silesian nobles, to advance but with strict orders. Do not pursue beyond 300 yards, maintain formation, and prepare to withdraw on signal. This division advanced more cautiously, and the Mongols repeated their feigned retreat. But this time the Christian troops halted after a short pursuit. For a brief moment, it seemed the lesson had been learned. But then the Mongols deployed a weapon that shattered the fragile discipline: smoke bombs. Mongol engineers ignited containers of sulfur, pitch, and other materials that produced thick, acrid smoke. The wind carried it directly into the faces of the Christian 2nd Division, blinding them and creating choking, disorienting conditions. Mongol horns blared in the confusion, and warriors emerged from the smoke at close range, firing directly into the disordered Christian ranks. Panic spread. Units lost contact with each other. The retreat signal was given, but in the smoke and chaos, many didn't hear it. The 2nd Division began a fighting withdrawal that turned into a rout. Perhaps half of the 4,000 men made it back to the main line. The rest were cut down by pursuing Mongol cavalry. By early afternoon, Duke Henry had fewer than 10,000 effective troops remaining, having lost over half his army without inflicting significant casualties on the Mongols. This was the lowest point. Victory was impossible. Survival was doubtful. But Henry made the decision that would secure his place in history, even in defeat. He would cover the retreat of his remaining forces and civilians fleeing toward Legnica. He ordered his 4th Division, the reserve, to begin withdrawing toward the town in good order, while he and the elite 3rd Division, his Knights Templar, Hospitallers, Teutonic Knights, and Household Guard, would hold the Mongol army in place. It was a suicide mission dressed in steel and prayers. Henry's final division numbered perhaps 2,000 men, the cream of European military prowess, each knight worth 5 or 10 ordinary soldiers in close combat. They formed a tight wedge formation and advanced directly toward the Mongol center. No pursuit of feigned retreats this time. This was a deliberate sacrificial charge meant to force the Mongols into close quarters battle, where their archery advantage would be neutralized. The Knights Templar led the spearhead, their white mantles with red crosses visible even through the haze of smoke and dust. They smashed into the Mongol line with devastating force. For the first time that day, Mongols died in significant numbers. The heavily armored Europeans were nearly impervious to arrows at close range, and their swords and maces shattered Mongol light cavalry in direct combat. For 30 minutes, Henry's elite force carved a bloody path through the Mongol center, killing hundreds and creating something unprecedented: Mongol disorder. But numbers and mobility ultimately decided the battle. Mongol wings began to close around the Christian wedge from both sides. Baidar committed his reserves, fresh Tumans that had not yet engaged. The Christians found themselves in a contracting circle of enemies, firing arrows from all directions. Duke Henry himself fought in the front ranks, his banner visible to rally his men. Accounts differ on the exact moment of his death, but most agree he was dragged from his horse by Mongol warriors using lassos, a tactic specifically designed to unhorse armored knights. He was captured alive and executed on the battlefield, possibly beheaded. His body was later identified by his wife through a distinctive sixth toe on his left foot, as his face had been mutilated beyond recognition. The Knights Templar and Hospitallers fought to the last man, refusing to retreat or surrender. When Mongol forces finally overran their position around mid-afternoon, they found circles of dead horses and exhausted knights who had made their final stand back to back. Of Henry's 2,000-man elite division, perhaps 100 escaped. The Mongols, as was their custom, collected the ears of the dead to tally their victory. Some chronicles claim they filled 9 large sacks with severed ears, suggesting casualties in the tens of thousands. Though this is likely exaggerated or includes civilian victims from surrounding villages, the immediate aftermath was grim. The Mongols had won a decisive tactical victory, destroying a major Christian army in a single day. They pursued fleeing troops toward Legnica, but they did not press the attack on the town itself. This decision was crucial and has puzzled historians for centuries. Why would the Mongols, having just crushed their opposition, not immediately capitalize by storming Legnica and continuing their invasion? The answer lies in what happened simultaneously 300 miles to the south. On the same day as Legnica, another Mongol army suffered unexpected difficulties at the Battle of Mohi in Hungary. Although they eventually won that battle, it proved far costlier than anticipated, and the overall Mongol campaign was losing momentum. Moreover, the Mongols at Legnica had not achieved a cost-free victory. While their casualties were far lower than the Christians, they had lost between 2,000 and 4,000 men, significant for an army operating so far from home. The fanatical resistance of Henry's final charge had impressed and concerned them. If every European army fought with such desperation, the conquest of the continent would be bloodier than anticipated. Most importantly, King Wenceslas and his 50,000-man Bohemian army had finally arrived in the region. When Mongol scouts reported this massive reinforcement, Baidar and Orda made a strategic calculation. They could potentially defeat Wenceslas, but it would cost thousands more warriors, and they would still need to face additional armies from Germany and France that were reportedly mobilizing. The risk-reward ratio had shifted. The Mongols withdrew eastward from Silesia by mid-April, linking up with other Mongol forces in Hungary. Throughout the summer of 1241, they raided the Hungarian countryside, but the momentum of their invasion had stalled. Then, in December 1241, news reached the Mongol commanders that changed everything. Ogedai Khan, the great Khan and supreme leader of the Mongol Empire, had died in Mongolia. By Mongol law, all princes and generals had to return to the capital Karakorum to elect a new great Khan. Batu Khan, commanding the entire European campaign, ordered a general withdrawal. By early 1242, the Mongol armies had completely evacuated Central Europe, never to return in such force. It was one of history's most consequential coincidences. Had Ogedai lived another year, Western Europe might have faced the full weight of Mongol conquest. The extended consequences of Legnica rippled across decades. Poland had bought time with blood. The 3-month delay caused by Henry's resistance, combined with the Battle of Mohi's costs, had prevented the Mongols from establishing permanent bases in Central Europe before the Khan's death forced their withdrawal. In the immediate aftermath, Poland lay devastated. Silesia had lost perhaps 30% of its population to Mongol raids and the battle's casualties. Duke Henry's death left his son, Bolesław, to inherit a fractured duchy. It would take 15 years for Silesia's economy to recover to pre-invasion levels. But the survival of Polish identity and Catholic Christendom was secure. The Mongols would never again penetrate so deeply into Europe, their attention diverted by succession crises and campaigns in the Middle East and China. So what was the grand significance of Legnica? On the surface, it was a Mongol victory, a battle where a European army was crushed. But the strategic outcome was a Christian success. Duke Henry II achieved through sacrifice what couldn't be achieved through military superiority. He delayed the Mongol advance long enough for circumstances to shift. If Legnica had fallen in a single day without resistance, the Mongols would have reached Bohemia and Germany weeks earlier, potentially conquering those regions before Ugeday's death. Instead, the stubborn, bloody resistance at Legnica demonstrated to the Mongols that Europe would not collapse as easily as Russia or the Middle Eastern kingdoms. Every mile would be contested. Every city would require a siege. Every army would fight to the death. This realization, combined with logistical strain and political developments back in Mongolia, made the European campaign seem less attractive than other opportunities. Imagine a counterfactual. If Henry had refused battle and retreated, the Mongols could have bypassed him, ravaged Bohemia unopposed, and potentially reached Vienna or even the Rhine by summer 1241. German principalities were politically divided and militarily unprepared. France was distracted by conflicts with England. Rome itself might have faced siege. The Renaissance, born in Italian city-states a century later, might never have occurred if those cities had been razed by Mongol invasions. The scientific revolution, emerging from European universities, could have been delayed for centuries if those institutions were destroyed. Legnica, despite being a battlefield defeat, was a strategic victory because it preserved the possibility of European cultural development. Duke Henry II deserves recognition not as a brilliant tactical commander, but as a leader who understood when to spend lives to buy time. His decision to engage the Mongols, even in unfavorable conditions, was strategically sound. His final charge, covering the retreat of thousands of civilians and soldiers, was militarily suicidal, but morally magnificent. Today, the Battle of Legnica is commemorated in Poland as a symbol of resistance against overwhelming odds. Duke Henry II was beatified by the Catholic Church in 1972, recognized as a martyr who died defending Christendom. The battlefield itself, near the modern town of Legnica Pole, hosts memorials and a museum dedicated to the battle. Every year on April 9th, historical reenactors gather to recreate the desperate struggle, reminding modern audiences of the day when Europe's future hung by a thread. The legacy extends beyond Poland. Military historians study Legnica as an example of asymmetric warfare, where tactical defeat can serve strategic objectives. The Mongol tactics demonstrated there, the feigned retreats and envelopment maneuvers, influenced European military thinking for generations. The importance of disciplined troops who wouldn't break formation, the value of combined arms with infantry supporting cavalry, and the necessity of intelligence about enemy methods all became doctrinal lessons extracted from the blood-soaked fields of Silesia. In the broader sweep of history, Legnica stands as a testament to a simple truth. Sometimes the bravest act is not winning, but fighting when victory is impossible, because the act of resistance itself changes the calculus for the enemy. Duke Henry and his 20,000 men couldn't defeat 25,000 Mongols, but they could make them bleed, make them hesitate, and make them question whether the conquest of Europe was worth the cost. In that sense, Legnica was not a defeat at all. It was the day Poland, and by extension all of Europe, chose to stand rather than kneel. And that choice echoed through the centuries, preserving a civilization that would one day reshape the world. Thank you so much for watching this deep dive into one of medieval history's most pivotal battles. If you found this story compelling, please hit that like button and help us reach 1,000 likes in the next 24 hours. Subscribe to the channel if you want more in-depth military history content that goes beyond the surface-level stuff you find elsewhere. Drop a comment below telling me what battle you'd like to see covered next. Should I explore more Mongol invasions, medieval European conflicts, ancient warfare? Your suggestions drive what I research next, so let me know. Until next time, remember that history isn't just about who won and who lost. It's about the moments when ordinary people faced impossible choices and decided that some things were worth dying for. Stay curious, stay engaged, and I'll see you in the next video.